Hello and welcome. This is Lisa Jones, and you are listening to the Exploring Death podcast. Hello and welcome to the Exploring Death podcast. Today, I have Rick Randall with me. Rick Randall is an innovative thought leader in the estate planning process. He was an early advocate of living trust planning, but soon developed a real concern about how traditional estate planning was and is approached. His wealth reception planning movement emphasizes a lifetime relationship with clients and their families. His clients continually improve their plan through participation in his Empowered Legacy program. And heirs are prepared in advance for both financial and non-financial issues like grieving that they will have to deal with. His new book, The Empowered Estate Plan, is due out later this year, and his own podcast, The Truth About Estate Planning, is slated for an October 1st launch. Rick's private firm serves clients nationwide, and Rick owns and operates the national network of estate planning attorneys who are licensed and trained in his holistic approach to planning. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, I am thrilled to have you here. I feel like this is a part of the whole exploring death that so many people want to avoid. And you and I had a wonderful conversation 2 weeks ago to discuss what it is you do. And I just feel this is such an important aspect that it needs to be shared. And I'm here today to welcome you and to talk about exploring death on this more, excuse me, the nuts and bolts of figuring out what to do with your estate or how to go about planning it and everything. So where do you want to start?
Well, I think the big things from the introduction, one of the things that I mentioned, the concern that I had with the traditional planning is it's very reactive. And it goes along with things that I know you're very familiar with and try to fight about people putting off the discussion of death and those kinds of things, which of course this is going to happen. So the way estate plan is traditionally done, even today, is you get a set of documents and put them on the shelf and they sit there. Sometimes we don't even know they're on the shelf. People have trouble finding them. But what happens is people are named in the documents to do jobs they don't know what their function's supposed to be. They don't know how it's supposed to work. And all of this, they are supposed to learn during the grieving period, which, as you know, is the absolute worst time to try to get new information crammed into our heads. And so you couldn't create a worse system if you actually set out to do it when you look at it. And so what we've tried to do is turn that around and just recognize, have fun along the way, developing a plan, getting people involved in it, and making things better so that when death finally does come along for the client, everybody's prepared, knows what their role is, and can actually, in some of the families, you hear that term about a life celebration. We've had a few where there's actually, in our process, there's both laughter and crying in the same meeting. And it's kind of funny because it's the family enjoys, just as the client did for years, the stories and the ways that we approach it. So it's very different and it's proactive rather than reactive.
Well, I love that. And I think for me personally, it was a reactive when my first husband, Ian, was diagnosed with cancer. Being a CPA myself, I just thought immediately we need to get our estate plans figured out. And I think for most people, that's not the first thing they think of because they're not a certified public accountant or in that field. And also it's something they don't want to face or even think that might be the ultimate outcome. So even when currently, I think you're right about when people are approaching it, it's usually because there's been an incident of somebody being diagnosed. And again, it's not the time to be thinking about these things. It's so much better to be able to approach it when you're healthy and clear-minded and really knowing what you want. And that's what I love about your process is that it's really allowing people to go in with a clear mind and an open heart to figure out these really important issues that need to be done. And if you don't do them, I mean, the consequences are quite dire if you don't have your estate plan in order before you pass away.
Yep. And you see a lot of that on the news and those kinds of things. So the celebrities get all the publicity, but they're actually pretty normal in terms of the percentages. So about 2/3 of the people, Lisa, don't have any plan at all. And so what happens is everybody's just at the mercy of all these systems that they're unfamiliar with. And so what I think it bothers me most is the people that go to see somebody, they have to kind of force themselves to do that. Then they don't get something that really adds to their life. It's kind of a check the box. Okay, I'm a responsible person now. I've got my will, or I've got my trust, and most of them don't work. And so that's the reason for the Truth About Estate Planning podcast name is the truth is most plans don't work. If by work we mean it meets their expectations. So people think they know what's going to happen, so they do have expectations, but they don't know how to get from here to there. And it's actually not an event where you go sign a document, but a process that grows and deepens as you move forward. That's what makes the planning process rich. And if you can have fun as you do it, then that's the best part. That's what we try to do.
That's amazing. Well, let's step back and talk about how you got interested in estate planning to begin with. So was there something in your life that kind of woke you up to this idea?
There was. And what was funny is, like a lot of things in life, I actually found out, I didn't really piece it together until after it had happened. But one of the stories I tell in my workshops is about my dad. And so this was my most important probably experience with death. Is my dad died when I was 20. And so a lot of people have it worse than that, but I always tell this story is that there was always a sense of loss, that I never got to talk to my dad when he was an adult. He was my hero. We were extremely close. And he was this indestructible guy who worked for the federal government, never missed a day's work his entire career, and then died. So it was a big deal. It was pancreatic cancer. And so it was fast. Although he lasted a lot longer than they thought. So it was a bad ending. But when I say this to my colleagues, I say I didn't get a chance, or to clients, to talk with my dad when I was adult. Most of them assure me, you ain't missing much. Parents. And now I'm the dad. And so that's been a problem for me and been with me. So in the workshops, what it became was really all an estate plan is a letter from dad or mom and dad. And if you approach it that way, it's a lot different experience than all these technical mumbo jumbo and the new vocabulary and all that. And so that's what we try to focus on, is what do you want to tell people? There's some really good things in this wealth reception movement. Like if you were diagnosed and we found out that you had 30 days to live, who would you talk with? And so we give them a second to write down. People don't have much trouble doing that. They write down who they talk with, and then we'd ask them, what would you talk with them about? What would you tell them? And then we ask them, where does it say that in your estate plan? And everybody, if it's a group workshop, everybody goes, ooh. So it's just a letter from dad. And so I was more interested, probably like you with your CPA background. I was interested in the money and the financial side of it originally. That's what attracted my attention. And then later figured out that this was really good. I went to law school not thinking I was going to do estate planning. And then I loved the teaching and the sharing. And I was okay with the numbers, but I stumbled into this is, having had that experience, it was valuable to talk with clients about it. And so I actually enjoy being kind of a trusted person to help nurture that out of people. And so that's what most of our national network people are like. An awful lot of them lost somebody early. And so they like to make that contribution, that kind of payback, and help other families through a hard time.
Wow, that really, it's emotional for me to hear that, because one of the things I really wanted my husband to do was to write a letter to the kids, so when they got older, they could receive that. And I I really applaud you for putting that aspect in this planning process, because I think that's exactly what is missing. It's so much about the numbers and the technicalities, the legalities of it all, and it loses the actual humanness of what's happening. And as you mentioned, when you're grieving or when you've just found out about somebody's potential death, I mean, it's just not the time to be working on those types of things. I mean, you're truly not cognizant and available to work on that. So I love this idea of the planning ahead of time and who would you want to talk to, and really allowing yourself to go there to live a more fulfilled life, rather than having those regrets at the end and not doing that. So amazing.
Well, and it takes a while, is what we found. And so you, we're fond of saying, if you look at somebody's, we do trusts in our practice, and an awful lot of people are today, as compared to when I first started doing them. It was a pretty wild, stray concept. But that's one of the things I liked it was an empty slate, so you could write things and you could kind of do what you wanted to do with it. And what we find is people really struggle with that. So they find a person, and I feel like this is the majority of my clients still today, and of our national network clients. We're willing to do a lot more than they're able to do. Because if if I give you, I tell them first, the way the standard is, if you take the front and the back page off of one couple comes in, you take that off, and then the next couple comes in, you take those off. You can't tell them apart. It's all word processing. So we teach about the classified trade secret of estate planning. Did you know that attorneys have computers? and everybody laughs at that. And it's like, okay, so now the secret's out. So the key is, how do you use them? And so we found, if I give you, so here, Lisa, I will, here's a blank sheet of paper, and I'll put in there anything that you want. Most people aren't authors because they can't do that. Blood starts coming out of their forehead. They just can't do it. So we'll say, could you do a checklist? If we gave you little things. And so one of our big things is, it's easier to edit than it is to create. And there's a little checklist with some instructions. And it's been pretty amazing that there are patterns. And so you don't have to have your quill pen any more than we do to write up. It doesn't have to be your memoirs and your autobiography and all that kind of stuff. But if you get started, over time, people will grow into the plan. And a lot of my clients have been with me now 2 decades or more. Just today, we had another one where a lady came in with her 2 sons. And that's happening more and more, where the whole family is getting in well before the death. She's in good health. So she's a little older, obviously, than she was when she started with me, but she's still vibrant, completely on her own, doing all kinds of things. But it was the right time for her, kind of in this journey, to sit down with them. They're adults. They can handle money. There's no problem. So to the traditional planning community, there's no reason for that meeting.
Right.
But for us, they were really being drawn in. She doesn't have anything, and that's a pretty typical client. She doesn't have anything special, or, if you looked at their plan, it would be a very technical and very cold boilerplate plan. But around it, she filled in the personal, and we had fun and laughed through the meeting. And my partner Whitley did that meeting with them, and we traded off so I could come in here, and so they know the firm, they know the people they'll be working with, and it makes a big difference. So I think that's a big part of it, is that it does grow, and it gets better the longer you stay at it.
That's wonderful. And you mentioned something about a loving trust. Is that kind of what you call it, or?
When I started, there was a book. My mentors were Bob Asperdi and Reno Peterson. They wrote a book called The Loving Trust. And it was really one of the big things that started the Living Trust movement. And it's kind of a hokey name. So I'll give you what and I used to say this. And I'm still okay with it. So when you change the I to an O, the difference is the loving instructions.
Oh, beautiful.
3/4 of the people are, that is so hokey, I would never do that, and so forth. And so I had a very early client I got a partner who is a really good tax attorney, friend that I went to law school with. I went to college with him. We became better friends in law school. And he wanted to come into my firm, and it was a big deal. At a master's in taxation, at every kind of Georgetown graduate, everything's great. And one of his big hangups was that we called it the loving trust in our documents. And so he really gave me a hard time about it. And so we had our first client die, and the widow comes in, and she pauses in the middle of the meeting. He was in the meeting with me, and she says, and she kind of dramatically put her pencil down and says, I need to tell you guys something. You guys call this a loving trust. And you could feel my partner grab the chair and everything. And I said, yeah. She was looking at me, and I said, yes. And she goes, you guys, you probably don't know this, but my husband, Sam was his name. Sam lived to complete this trust. So you guys don't see it. They lived at about 45 minutes away. She goes, he was on chemotherapy, and he would just get up enough energy. He would do these meetings, and he'd have to lay down in the back seat all the way down. And he made all these trips to make sure that this was right. So she says, this really is a loving trust. And so she got up, and that was the end of the meeting. And she got up and left. As soon as the door closed, my partner goes down the hall, and he goes, we do loving trust in this firm. That's what distinguishes us as a business. So, but it was really serious. So this was not that unusual, as you do estate planning because you care about somebody else. And that was the actual first death in our practice. And now today we don't call them loving trust. I've preserved, there's a cover page that says this loving trust prepared for. And then inside the documents, we've conceded, okay, we'll call it what everybody else does, because financial advisors get confused whether they have to put the name on it. So, but they are, to the best of our ability, they're all loving trusts. And I think that's legit, because why spend all this time and energy? There's not much in it for you. You're the one that's going to die.
That's right. That's right.
Do it for somebody else. And if you keep that in mind, I think the plans are a lot better.
That's amazing. And I love the idea that families would come together and, for example, your client that came in this morning with her two sons and discuss what's happening. I think, for example, my personal experience, my father, he had everything, his I's dotted and his T's crossed. However, he spoke to my brother and I a little bit about what he was doing, but it was not in alignment with where we were thinking what was going to go. And again, he could do whatever he wanted with his money. It wasn't about the money issue. It was more that he was creating a trust, and we were going to be part of this and all that. And after his death, it's just been a complete debacle, because now my brother and I have to serve on this board that we don't want to be a part of. And so I think it's so important not only to discuss ahead of time with your family really what it is, because I think maybe I didn't understand what he was trying to do. Maybe there just wasn't enough discussion around it, but there was such a limited amount of discussion that I'll speak for myself. It's left me in a position of not being happy at all. And now it feels like I'm going to be in this for a very long time, and there's nothing I can do. I'm handcuffed to this situation. And so I think it's so important, if you want to leave your loved ones who, you love supposedly, in a good place, it's so important to talk to them about what your wishes are and what you're thinking and what you're planning. And leaving that loving trust is the best medicine that you could give anybody once you've passed away.
One of the things that I found that was a surprise was, let's say that your dad had approached it a little bit differently. In my experience, a lot of times the adult children are resistant. They don't want to visualize the parent not being there. That's your money. You guys do whatever you want. And so I spent a long time, maybe 8-10 years, really pushing the clients to get to the adult children. And then we got pushback that the kids have the talk. This is at least the second talk. There might be others, This one is the estate planning talk. And they really are, some of them are resistant a lot more than I thought. And so they don't want to be drawn in. And so a couple things come to mind. First, the way we talk with our clients is there's 2, 4, and with. And so an awful lot of people, the whole project, the whole idea of the estate planning is resisted so much, they finally break down, they come in and they go, okay, estate planning, do it to me. Sit there, kind of like you're at the dentist, which is not a bad analogy. The quicker and the least painful, if you can make it, that's great. And then the 4 is what most people do is, I'm doing this estate plan for you or for them, and they're not really enrolled in it. Mm-hmm. And what happens is then, so how many of you feel like, I'm talking to clients now, the makers of the trust, and how many of you feel like they're not exactly that appreciative of what you're doing? All the hands go up right away. And so the ultimate goal is to do it with them. And so we have to find ways to get those openings to do that. I have a lot of engineer clients, and these are not the most emotional types of people. In fact, they don't like it at all. But they'll write detailed letters. And so the letter from dad works well for them, where other people, wouldn't do that. So the with part has been the hardest part. And now, as I've gone through my career, the older the parent gets, now the less they want to share the problems that they're having. So as they age, they need to keep their independence. And so one of the difficulties is the adult children coming in and kind of taking over. And so it's both a fear and actually a legitimate thing. One of the really good books that I recommend is How to Say It to Seniors by David Solie. And it's a lifetime of work that he's done. It's really interesting about the generational aging. So we talk about, the different stages of infant and toddler and young adult and all that. There is a final stage where people do what he calls a life review. And that's the time where you can get a lot of those rich things. Person's not about to die, but they're at the stage where they look back. And that's why the older people repeat things and they talk about people and say, I haven't thought of them for 30 years. Don't know why that does it. So it's a natural thing, but it tends to drive the adult kids, my age, the boomers, drives them nuts. So the greatest generation people are at that stage now. The boomers will get there, and I don't know what's going to happen with us and our kids. So we talk a lot more with them. But I don't know if this subject is that much better. So the 2-4 with was one of them. The other is why we came on this term of wealth reception might be interesting to you. There's all sorts of things about how you do estate planning. But if you do that and you're looking to, I'm going to give this to you, if you turn around and look the other way from the point of view of the receiver, some of the things you just shared, they're knowable in advance, and they're not discussed. So I just asked the clients, would you agree that the questions and the concerns the receivers would have are different than yours? Yes. And so if it's going to be a successful plan, does it make sense to you that those need to be taken into account? And that's not hard. That's just an obvious thing. They say, well, sure. Well, how do we do that? Well, we need to get them in here. We need to get them enrolled in the conversation. And the better plans, the families will do that.
That's great. And it really, I just think that's why this conversation is so important, because by doing the planning ahead of time, everyone can be happy, because ultimately, if you're taking the time to create this plan, obviously you're hoping that the receivers are happy about the situation or how it's going to turn out. And like you said, if they're not taking into consideration what the receivers are thinking, then it's kind of, the whole plan blows up, basically.
Why are we doing it?
Why are we doing it? Exactly. Oh my goodness. And you also talk about the terminal illness process. I mean, is there, is there something that you've seen
It was. One of the things I've noticed, and this is the closest to some of your other work probably that I've been, it's really interesting, just an observation I thought your listeners would be most attuned to. We have a terminal illness process now, but we got it from one experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then I took a little, and I'm a systems guy, so I took a little arrow. All of our processes have an arrow, and it says the terminal illness process, and it has an arrow. But it's really based on the steps that this one family went through. Guy comes in, and now you guys know the story pretty much anyway. He looked exactly like my dad, which was very difficult for me. And again, so dad died, whatever it is, 40 years ago. And very few reasons to do that, but he had a flat top. He looked like he was right out of the 70s where my dad died. And great guy. And he had the terminal diagnosis. So we went into a conference room, table I'm sitting at today, as a matter of fact, and he sat at the head of the table, and all the family came. And everybody sat around the table, and we had a discussion. And the dad, he was very proud of his estate plan. And he was there with the morphine drip on. And he would every once in a while have to pause. We'd wait a couple of seconds. He said, so this is why we're doing it. This is who we've worked with. And it was great because he was the chairman of the board. And so I think he enjoyed that. And I think the kids enjoyed watching him do it. So as we got up, one of the adult sons said, it's not very often you visit with an attorney and you feel better when you're leaving. I really appreciate this. He died 3 days later. So everybody files back in the room, and they told me what we did after that, because we had these things, discussions about the stories and things, is we got out the Super 8s. We went down in the basement, and they watched all these old videos with him, and so everybody had a very, very good day. And then he died just 3 days later. They were back in the office. He actually died about a day and a half later, and they're right back. What I want you to hear for your listeners is everybody filed back into the room, and this happens all the time. I'm not sure I ever noticed it before. Everybody sits in the same chairs. And there was the chairman's chair was empty. And we went through things, and there's not, Lisa, like it on TV where you do a reading of the will, like you're in and you're out. That doesn't happen. People think it does. At least not in the practices I'm aware of. But he was there. I mean, you could feel that we were doing what he wanted us to do. And he just said, I want you to do this. I want to go smoothly. One of the biggest things in all plans is I don't want you to fight. I want everybody to get along. And so it was just the presence of the person is very much there. And to me, that's a plan that works. And so there were a couple of strained relationships in the family, nothing, not a peep. Everybody was great. And I think that was a big part of it. So we offer the chance to get everybody together. As soon as there's a terminal diagnosis, most illnesses, there's time that you can get people together and tell them, do something for the family. It doesn't have to be the Super 8s, but do something as a family and tie this to it, because that's what they were trying to do, is to leave you that legacy. And so if you have a good experience with it, right in the same kind of time frame, it doesn't have to be so scary.
Wow, that's great. And I love the idea. I can just feel him there at the head of the table, like just hearing you recount the story. I can just imagine that he was etherically there with you all in that moment. And I'm sure he was proud of his family for stepping up and really doing what he was hoping for. Well, that's great. Well, I was hoping to do a little readings now that we've gone to that kind of, and just see what the cards have to say about estate planning. What do you think about that? I've never done a card reading on estate planning.
That's good.
Well, let's just see what cards come up and what kind of the intuitive information that comes through is going to say here. Oh my goodness, I love it already. I can already see. So I'll the first card is usually the blockage card, or that's what we call it, and it's simplicity. And I think it's so true. I think that people feel like it's so complicated. It's beyond their ability to deal with, it's like, I mean, that's where we all get blocked, and I've got complete chills running through my body, which is generally a sign of truth. I mean, wouldn't you agree that people just get overwhelmed because they think it's so much maybe bigger than it really is? Or
It is. And the phrase we use is that our goal is the simplicity on the other side of complexity. And so you have to kind of fight through the complexity, but once you do, it becomes much simpler. And those are the things you hang on to. So as much as they can lay off to us, we try to do it through stories, it works. And so that, I can relate to that a lot. It's a big goal for us.
right. Well, I love that. I think that's just right on. So then the action is light. And again, I think what you're doing is you're providing people with the opportunity to really shine their light about how they want the end to be. I mean, it's also a metaphor of they're going to the light, right? I mean, it's all about the ending and how they want it to unfold. And so what a beautiful opportunity that you're giving people. Really, I feel like your process is so much more personal and about the person rather than about the documentation. And I mean, that's just part of it. I mean, like you said, that's the complexity that has to the legalities that have to be taken care of, but allowing people to really shine their light and show, it's another thing that's coming through is the sun, and how, you want to shine your light on your loved ones once you're gone. And this is an opportunity by doing your estate planning, and especially doing it early and often, as we'll talk about your process also, that continuous updating, which I think is just brilliant. It really, I mean, it lights me up just talking about the idea that this is possible. So I love that. I love that's the action. And then the final is faith. That's the outcome, is the faith that you just trust that this is the process. And the more you can trust that by taking care of your affairs, as people say, it will really free you to allow you to live more fully and to not have that hanging over your head. I mean, there's nothing worse than having something that you should do just nagging at you. I mean, even if it's not something that's really conscious in your mind, deep down, we all know that this is something that needs to be attended to. And it's that fear that keeps people from really stepping up and doing it. But if you can just ultimately have that faith and know that once you've got it taken care of, then you can just breathe a sigh of relief and more fully live your life, which I think we've talked about as well, that's part of what you've seen or experienced with your clients, is once they've done this work, it really frees them up to live more fully.
I agree.
So great. Any thoughts on the reading or?
Well, it's a great summary. So I wasn't sure where it would go, but I agree. You've got to get through the simplicity first. I like the order, because if you don't get to the clarity of what you're trying to accomplish, it makes it harder to do. And bringing the light, sometimes it's disputes, bringing out whatever it is that the issues are. The word processing people, and this is kind of, I don't know what the right word of it is, but it sounds cooperative. I'll put anything in there that you want, but it doesn't really help you. And so to be able to be with people so that they can fight through whatever those issues are, if you shine the light on what the issue is, people can solve it. And they solve their own problems. There's a myth that the professional solves the problem. So you help people come up with whatever it is that's concerning them and fixing it. So I like that, the shining of the light. And then the faith, I wrote down something you said, which is trust the process. And we tell them that you, in our process, which you've alluded to a little bit with, most of our clients update their plans every couple years. It's entirely different if you take a look, more of a snapshot, than that you have to know the whole movie and how it's supposed to end. So if you trust the process, you'll continually get closer and closer, and it will feel better and better. That and little, how to eat an elephant one bite at a time. That you can do. And, at whatever time, when our time is there, then okay, time's up, and that's how far we got. But that it has to be better than trying to write in one sitting everything that you want to do, say, have happen, cover all your finances in advance, think of everything in the world. It's just too overwhelming. Even if you get past that initial little, I'm afraid to talk about it or don't want to talk about it. So I think the simplicity is tied in with it. And I think you can have good faith that the outcome will be right if everybody gets in there. So I think it's great.
Well, wonderful. Yeah. And I like your idea that the light, shining the light on whatever issues or problems there might be too. I think, for example, in my case where my dad was concerned, I mean, if we could have had a more open and honest discussion about what it is he was trying to accomplish and really then what my brothers and my concern were, I think that just would have been such a better outcome for everybody. And his death was sudden. He went in for surgery and had a complication. So it was so, just unexpected when he did die, that we just never had that opportunity, where sometimes when you do have a terminal illness, you have a little more time to maybe face that. But again, a lot of people don't even want to go there, even when they see the end coming. So we talked a little bit about the dash, and some people might be familiar with that. Some people might not, but tell the listeners about that phrase.
It's a poem called The Dash. It's by Linda Ellis. And it's one of the things that we do from time to time as part of the wealth reception is if you listen to that poem, and there's different things. I've been able to put some to music and you just read it. And it's powerful in a group setting in particular. It's great when you just read it, but in a group setting, the focus is there's the date at the beginning when you're born and the date that you die, but what it's really about is the dash. And the punchline of it is, what will you be proud of what they say about your dash? And that, especially in the little chunks, is very motivating for many people. And so some will relate to it like everything, some will not. But that's where the dash has helped in our practice, just to open people a bit, that the phrase is, it's not about the cars and the cash, that's what people think of is the stuff. Which leads me to another thing, and that's about the stuff. There's only two types: special stuff and junk. And when somebody dies, most of it is junk. People will not write down the special stuff, like this certain thing goes to this certain person, and the fights we know break out over the stuff. And now you and I are into it, and so we're already in a fight, so I may as well sue you over the money too. But it's unbelievable how much starts over little bitty things that could be handled. And so we've done the dash at programs where we try to end it with, maybe I can't do the whole list, but write down 3 things that where they're supposed to go. And then I find that they'll end up with 6 or 7. And that's, at least those are handled and off the table. And usually the families are there together. And so we found all kinds of things with that. So we use the dash, and I think that's a good thing. So if they have a nice recorded one that you can buy on a CD through a lot of the different places, successories type of places. And so it's out there. And so I think that's a really nice summary in this area.
That's great. That's great. Well, and let's wrap this up by talking about I guess it's the empowered legacy, or, the helping people. What I loved about it especially is that it's built in to be updated every couple years, where I know, again, from my own experience, once my husband and I had our estate plans put together and we wanted to make just a simple change, it was going to cost us thousands of dollars to make that one simple change. And we just said, oh, forget it. And then, it turned out the person I was trying to remove ended up dying. So it all worked out anyway, but I don't think that's the right way to approach this.
It's been interesting. And for the folks listening in, I tried to defend the traditional, I'm not in that camp, but I tried to explain to Lisa why that was the case. Is all I want to do is take a name out and put a name in. But when the attorney does it, they assume responsibility for everything else in the plan. And so they needed to give you an entirely new plan, even though you only asked for one little, thing you could do on a word processor. And it just doesn't compute to people. So those are built in, the empowered legacy, a part of it. And it's pretty seductive. What happens is it will make sense to you to come in because the laws will change every couple years. Don't know what they are, but okay, that makes sense. Actually, it sneaks up on you as you get the education. We keep repeating, get the family trained, get the family together, have these conversations. That's the real power of it. And so over time, just trying to keep it current. So you update for life, changes in your life, and we just have a little sheet, things that you need to tell the estate plan attorney, law, which is our job, so we'll update on that. And the third L is learning. And with the learning, then the concepts get better. And certainly I've grown. And so every year I have new books and new tapes and new approaches. And we share them. And all of these things like that we've talked about in this call, there are client stories that you haven't heard since we haven't been together for a couple of years. And these are the things going on. And here's what we learned from it. So you don't have to learn in the school of hard knocks. We can all get better together. So it's other people's learning is the best. So let them have the problem and we'll learn to avoid it. And in a group that does happen. So the empowered legacy and another concept I've actually already shared is the purposeful trust. That's so there's a lot about our why out there today or our purpose. And there are some folks that we work with that are very good. The risk, again, is the blank sheet that we already talked about. But what's interesting is if you, the man's name is John Warnick. He does a tremendous job with this, John A. And what he's found is they're just like, if you think of word processing, just a little text box. And we put a couple of thoughts of yours in there and we italicize it. Someone put it in a different color. What he's found is when the adult children come in for the inheritance, they do look through the trust. Now, my practice, I try to shield you from that. There's too much of that legal mumbo jumbo. But he likes to put it right in the document. And his experience is they'll flip from one of those text boxes to the next to find out what parent said. And they'll say, oh, that was dad. You could tell it was in his words. Doesn't have to be fancy. And so we take the legalese and match it up to more your plain English. And that's what a purposeful trust is. And it's been really effective for people if they'll do it. So I guess, Lisa, at the end is you can do so much more, I guess, is my message. But I want to say you don't have to do that because the standard stuff that we would put in, we've already got all that learning from all the other folks. And so you kind of, it's like a stream coming down. That water's been flowing for a long time. You just jump in and it'll carry you. So you can start swimming later if you want, or just let everybody else carry you. That's what's been fun for me to watch. And the least likely people seem to come up with I mentioned the engineers, with the emotional letter comes out of left field. And it's just been great. And I think the clients experience it together in this system. And that helps a lot.
That's amazing. I love it. Well, tell people, we'll have the links below on my website, but also just in general, how can people get a hold of you? And
well, probably the best way, there's two websites. I think probably for me, just an email to me is probably the best way, and I'll route it. And the reason for that, our practice is national, and then I've got people around. Some people, like with you, want to work with you. Some people want to work with somebody that they know would have a similar approach. And so our national and network attorneys are like that. So if you just write me, it's Rick, R-I-C-K, at lifespanusa.com, and I'll route it to the right way. And the other is NEPA, National Network Estate Planning Attorneys, NNEPA, untitled.com. There's a website, and there's a contact page there where you can say interested in learning more.
Fabulous. Well, Rick, this has been so educational. I loved all your stories, and I know that our listeners are going to benefit so much from this. And I just want to encourage everyone listening to reach out to Rick or go to that website and take the next step. I think that's the other part, right? It's like you said, eating an elephant. Just take the next step and just let it guide you toward ultimately getting done what you really need to get done.
Say one more quick thing, and that is, because that's so hard, we try really hard to go through so that people know what they can do, which means we have to extend a little bit first, and then we find out who you are, and then we quote the fee, and then we start drafting. And the reason for that order is I found everyone will hold back. They don't know what they can do, number one, and that's our job to teach the people. And number two, I'm afraid of what it would cost. So I don't know what's fancy or what's expensive, so I won't bring that up. And so in our process, there's a development phase that's at no charge. And then we have a sense of what we're doing. Here's what the charge would be. And we know how long it takes, and we do have those computers. So we're able to do it.
Well, I love it. So therefore, there's no reason not to reach out and just find out at least what the options are right now for you, and to make sure that you start down this path of getting your affairs in order, so to speak, and do it at a time when you aren't under the crunch or under the gun, shall we say, of having to get it done.
Agreed.
All right, Rick. Well, you have a wonderful day, and thank you so much for taking the time. It's been amazing.
Thank you for having me. You made it easy.
And thank you so much for listening to the Exploring Death podcast. And until next time, aloha. Thank you for listening to the Exploring Death podcast. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Before you make any financial or legal decisions, consult a professional. This show is copyrighted by Exploring Death. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.